Peace be upon you. Welcome to episode 2 of Let's Review, our brand new podcast. And at the time of the recording, or at the time of the show right now, we are going through a ceasefire or temporary pause in the fighting. We don't know how long it will continue, and there's talk of it re-continuing immediately after. The pain and suffering is still extremely deep. And in the first podcast, we invited a rabbi, an Imam, and we asked about retribution in the respective faiths. What does the teachings tell us is the acceptable amount of retribution? And we received a lot of comments after that first podcast. Some people were extremely happy with the dialogue, and some people were not happy with the fact of what the rabbi said in terms of justifying retribution against an innocent population. Today, we're going to continue on this topic, but we're going to delve a lot deeper and differently as well. And to join me today, I have in the studio here in London, Imam Zafir Malik, who is an Imam, and he's also the associate editor of the Review of Religion. So peace be upon you, and Imam Zafir, welcome today to this show. I'm also really delighted and privileged to have with us today a special guest all the way from New York, and it is quite early there, so I appreciate him coming at this time and joining us. And he is Rabbi Dovid Weiss. He is the spokesperson for the Naturei Karta global religious organization. He's an activist, and you probably have seen him all across the media, social media, since the beginning of this Palestine-Israel conflict or war. Rabbi Weiss, thank you so much for joining us. Peace be upon you.
Thank you, and I'm privileged with the help of the Almighty. It's an honor, a privilege to be on your program, in your review. And I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message, and so, inshallah, sanctify His name and bring peace to the world.
Rabbi Weiss, I want to go straight in because we had a rabbi in the previous show, and I want to be a bit more specific. Prime Minister Netanyahu, he quoted this particular passage of the Torah as a justification for the actions of what's happening now, and attacking or so-called retribution against an entire population. And this is in Samuel 15:3. And it says, "Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass." So the Prime Minister quoted this as a so-called justification of the actions of the Israeli government and army. How do you respond to this, Rabbi?
We have no possibility as a nation of even confronting Amalek, because this is something that was at that time, something that has to do with the identity of Amalek that we don't know what that is today. We don't know who or what or when or where. And certainly we have no right to go killing people.
Rabbi, just for me to understand, and for us to understand the viewers, so essentially, is it correct to use this Amalek reference to justify what's happening today?
Great Rabbi Chaim Halberstadt, who was, I would say, around 250 years ago or something, one of the greatest leaders of Judaism, recognized in the whole world, one of the holiest of our rabbis. He said that the people from the Jewish the nation, from the Jewish people, who are misleading people, a lot of them are Amalek. Their souls are Amalek. So it's a spiritual thing to us today. In other words, the people who maybe declare that you should be killing the Arabs, they are the Amalek. These people that are declaring that happens to be. But we really don't know. We can't identify Amalek for something like that.
So, Rabbi, it's very interesting what you said. You said the Jews are in exile. Can you explain that further? A lot of people are not familiar with this or aware of this. Where did creating this home for the Jewish people state come about? Can you explain this in a bit more detail?
Now, we know that for 2,000 years, we are in exile. A movement started mere 150 years ago or so, and that 140, 150 years ago, and that was called Zionism. Zionism is a movement that takes this covenant that Jews made on Mount Sinai, as I was saying, that Moses went on Mount Sinai, went up to God, and took the Torah, promised to be subservient, not to kill, not to steal, follow the laws of the Torah, the many commandments of the Torah. And till today, we strictly adhere to these commandments of the Torah. Then we were required to go into the Holy Land, but then we were driven from the land. And this is part of our being. For 2,000 years, we are out of the land. And we understood that it is because we are not on that high level of holiness that was expected of us. So as a nation, we are dispersed amongst the nations around of the world. As I say, to be loyal citizens, we are required not to make any attempt to return. This Zionism started this 150 years ago. A group of people who were estranged from the religion, totally, they divorced themselves from this godliness, from this religion, and they decided to create in Erzatz Judaism a transformation to nationalism. Zionism is nationalism. It was a movement of people, and I carried a picture here, for instance, of the movement, how it started. You have David Ben-Gurion reading the Declaration of Independence in Independence Hall in 1948. Now, you look at this picture, you will see that the people sitting at the dais at this at table, you don't find one of them covering their head, as it seems. And the Jew is required to cover his head to show that he moves as a God above him. It's a requirement in the Jewish law. He has the Stars of David on the wall, picture of Theodor Herzl, and this is he's the first prime minister of Israel. So just to get an idea what Zionism is, they say they're representing Judaism, the religion, when they're not even religious, and it's a farce, because Judaism is one thing and one thing only. It's a covenant we made with God to be subservient to God. 3,000 years, we follow it to the letter of the law as it is required of us. They decided we are going to create a Jewish homeland, a Jewish sovereignty, a Jewish place, and they were thinking of Uganda, Patagonia, any place that would be lush and productive. But then they sat in meetings in 1890s in Switzerland, and they said, hey, we need a lot of backing to create a state. So in order to create this homeland, we will have to go to Palestine. And then we'll tell the people, hey, this is the land that God gave the children of Israel. So it's the land of Israel for the children of Israel. And they'll be able to get a massive amount of backing from the Christians and from many Jews who are already 2 generations non-religious. They stopped practicing. They were ignorant of the religion. And they'll be able to tell them, hey, remember, God promised us the land so we can go and take it. So this movement of Zionism is a direct rebellion against God, because instead of saying to be a Jew means it's a religion, to be subservient to God, to keep the laws of the Torah, do not kill, do not steal, to do kindness to everybody, emulate God. They kept along and said, we're going to make a national home. We're going to just be a materialistic nation, a shell of what Judaism is. They're just going to use the name Israel and the Star of David, the menorah, the candelabra, that's the picture. They're going to do different things. But it's truly a false presentation of what Judaism is. It's rooted in heresy, in rebellion against God, in diminishing of the greatness of God. That's what Zionism is. So it's a whole concept. And you'll ask any Zionist, that's what they say. We have to have a land, an insurance policy, a land to protect us. So it's purely antithetical. It's to what Judaism is. It's contradictory. We say Judaism is religion, subservience to God. Zionism says they're a nationhood.
Rabbi, that's a really fascinating history that you mentioned about Zionism and how the Jews were exiled. But it comes on to a kind of logical preceding question, which I wanted to find out more from you, is that obviously being of the Jewish faith, you're an Orthodox Jew, and would you not want to return to the Promised Land, the Holy Land, at some point? Because all the discussion is around this. Do you want to return to the Promised Land?
Yes, we want to return to the Holy Land. Every Jew prays for that every day. But our yearning to return to the Holy Land is when the Almighty Himself will make a metaphysical change in the world, but all humanity will recognize as one God, will stop being atheists. Then there will be all the nations will come together, join hands, and go serve God, and God will rebuild the temple. So the Jewish belief of the end of days is not that we will take up a gun and force ourselves out of exile. On the contrary, it's just a metaphysical change, a miraculous happening where all humanity will not become Jews. All the humanity will believe in one God. Everybody will go up and serve God, and God will build the temple. So till that day comes, we are expressly forbidden to rebel against God and try to preempt this end of exile. We have to accept it's a godly declared exile, not because we were physically weak, but because of our spiritual lacking, we are dispersed amongst the nation. This is pure Judaism. There's no other two views of what Judaism is.
Rabbi, it's really intriguing, this conversation we're having, and I really appreciate that we are having it. I'm sure many of the viewers will be benefiting as much as we are here. But I wanted to find out that we find in history that there was perhaps a pushback against Zionism or the Zionist movement in the non-Jewish communities. But what about amongst the Jewish communities, amongst the people of the Jewish faith? How did they react or respond or condemn, if anything, to the Zionism?
We put out a book called The Rabbis Speak Out, which is a compilation of the leading rabbis from around the world. We have tens of thousands of rabbis through this period, but in this 130 years record of our religious Jewish opposition to Zionism. Now it's already about 40 years around. And you have the rabbis from every single country speaking about this movement of Zionism, declaring their movement is unacceptable. Now, this was before they made the state. A lot of it started before them, and this is continuing till today. But for instance, there was I'm giving one example. Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Weiss, he was a codifier of Jewish law that everybody uses books called Mishnah Brura. Everybody recognizes greatness. And he's just one little word. He said, therefore, the Zionists are dead limbs of our people, which causes the entire body to rot. And he's a codified Jew so that everybody followed. And just an example, we considered Zionism a cancer, a growth on the Jewish body, because they're totally transforming what it means to be a Jew, to learn the Torah, be pious, God-fearing, helping people. Zionism was going to make a national home. So everybody understood in the Jewish communities where Zionism came from Europe. They came not from the Middle East. They came from Austria, Germany. They came along and they said they're going to make a home. And the rabbis there considered it haram. You know, they considered it that unacceptable, and they were really thrown out of every Jewish community in Europe. So the Zionism, when they decided to go up to Palestine and create the state of Israel, that is not only in the ideology behind it, the thought behind it, that changing Judaism from subservience to God into nationalism, but going into that is breaching the laws of exile. In other words, we are told we are not permitted to make 1 inch of a Jewish kingdom, sovereignty, national home. So then going and creating a state is unacceptable. And if it would have been uninhabited, Palestine, we would still stand in this vast opposition, just as we are today. But on top of that, because they made it in Palestine, Palestine was an inhabited land. So in order to create their state, they have to take the land away from the Palestinian inhabitants, who were mostly Muslim, and they were second largest community was Christian, and there was the Jewish community, which was God-fearing and anti-Zionist. So that creation of the state comes about by fighting, killing, and destroying the Palestinian people. That in and of itself, is a critical breach of the laws of the Torah. We're not allowed to steal or kill. It's the basics of Judaism. So in every way you look at this Jewish state, this creation of the state of Israel, it's totally antithetical. It's contradictory to Judaism. And let me add just one thing. It's not a small thing, but it's like to say the icing on the cake. If they would have done to any nation, we would stand up and say, you're not allowed to kill, you're not allowed to steal, you're not allowed to have a state. But in order to create this state, they went to Palestine, which was inhabited by the Muslim people. And we have to remember, in this 2,000 years of exile, the Christians had a concept that if you're not going to become Christian, you're going to burn in hell. And they made the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal, where they tortured Jews and they burnt them at the stake. And there's still the torture chambers to be seen in Spain and Portugal. It's there. People see it. And the facts and the history is everybody knows. Nobody refutes the history. The Jews were tortured and they were banned from the land. They were thrown out of Spain and Portugal. And if they didn't escape, some of them, if they were left, people who stayed there were murdered. So what happened? The Jews, where did they go to? They went to Muslim countries, and it was the Muslims who took in the Jews. And including the Ottoman Empire took in the Jews, and Palestine was under the Ottoman Empire. So Jews flourished as distinctly religious Jews under distinctly Muslim countries. So we, as Jews, are required, according to the laws of our Torah, to show gratitude to good doctors. So we recognize that the Muslim countries for hundreds of years, Jews flourished there. We didn't have human rights groups to protect us. So we are required to show gratitude. Now the Zionists, in order to create their homeland in Palestine, they had to declare that all the inhabitants of Palestine who will object to the creating of the state, it's because they're anti-Semites, they hate the Jews. So how dare they say that? It's, in other words, it's repugnant. It's a crime. It's a crime. How dare they say the Muslims hate the Jews and therefore they want us out? Instead of saying because, oh, he's stealing their homes, he's stealing their towns. No, it's because they say they hate Jews. Well, we're supposed to show gratitude. So in every facet you look at Zionism, it's totally rebellion against God and unacceptable.
Rabbi, that's very fascinating, the way you separated the secular with the religious, with the essence of Judaism, which you explained. These are all very intriguing concepts, which will be new for many people. But you mentioned something about how people are saying that Muslims hate Jews. And here I feel it's very important. I turn to Imam Zafir. This is being pumped across the media, across social media. You open up anything, your X or Twitter, formerly Twitter, or the news sites. And we hear of these so-called incidents of Muslims hating Jews, or even to the extent that they're saying inherent in the Islamic religion, in the scripture, is a hatred towards Jews. So Imam Zafir, I want to ask you how you would respond to this.
I think I want to just start by saying, I think what Rabbi mentioned, fascinating, that when the Jews were persecuted in Europe, they actually sought refuge in Muslim lands, which is incredible. And it's a shame that it's a forgotten part or an overlooked part of history, or it's not in the common mainstream or narrative. But do Muslims hate Jews? Absolutely not. And again, as the Rabbi mentioned, that when the Jews were persecuted, they sought refuge in the Muslim lands. And in fact, if we go back to the early time of Islam, when a lot of people overlook this fact, that the Holy Prophet formed the first covenant in his lifetime with the Jews of Medina, when the Holy Prophet had to migrate because his own people were persecuting him. After 13 long years, he migrated from Mecca to Medina. And in Medina, there were already 3 tribes, Jewish tribes, settled there for 2-3 centuries. And the minute the Prophet Muhammad arrived there, he came and formed a treaty. And the treaty was that all of the citizens would live together. No one would be forced to convert into any other religion. They would live in harmony. They would be able to practice their own religion and live in a peaceful coexistence. And if anyone would attack Medina, then they would unite as one to defend. And so this was actually the first actual covenant that the Holy Prophet made in his lifetime. And it's known as the Charter of Medina. And in fact, later on, the United Nations, charters, they all reference this as a fundamental point of how one can live peacefully and coexist. And this was formed at a time when most of the world was living in the Dark Ages. Ahlul Kitab, they're called people of the book. And in fact, the Quran speaks very highly of them. And as a fundamental teaching of Islam, we have to respect all prophets. And that includes Prophet Moses, includes Prophet Abraham, includes all the Israelite prophets. So for us, if a Muslim claims that he hates the Jews, then he clearly hasn't studied his own teachings and clearly hasn't read the Quran.
Thank you for that, Imam Zafir. I will come back to you. I have more questions for you as well. But I wanted to go back, Rabbi Dovid. You mentioned some really, really interesting aspects which are really historically important as well. And I wanted to just say that one of the objectives of why we're doing Let's Review is to give different people of different backgrounds and beliefs the opportunity to express their religious views in a safe, in a honest and respectful environment. We may not agree with what people are saying to us, but we want to provide this platform. And this is what Review of Religions seeks to do. It's a great opportunity to remove ignorance through learning. And this is the way we can build bridges. This is one of the aims of this podcast. For the benefit of our viewers, Rabbi, can you give us, shed light on which branch of Judaism, as in every religion, including Judaism, there are many different denominations, Orthodox, liberal, so on and so forth. So which branch of Judaism do you represent? The rabbi I spoke to in episode 1, Benjamin Lau from Jerusalem, he said, according to the Torah, it's not justified to kill this and this categories of people, but he said, what can we do? We have to do what we are doing, and he gave justifications for it based on the current situation, based on self-defense. So he said that we're trying to be careful, etc., etc., etc. But anyhow, that's why I want to ask you this question as well.
Let's help the Almighty to give me the right words. We pray. This, first of all, we're speaking in a time that while we're sitting here, unfortunately, people in Gaza is being slaughtered daily. It's over 40 days, well over 40 days, maybe it's like 47 days. And that people are on the rubble, and time doesn't permit, although every life is so precious. We should be speaking about every one of these over 13,000 people killed, over 5,000 children, and the suffering that they're suffering without medical aid, it's just beyond words. And really we'd have to spend a lot of time about that. But just in order to because we want to help the people of Gaza, we're giving this program with God's help, inshallah, to be able to clarify that the world should know how to address the whole issue. So it's critical to understand what we're saying. So again, you had first started at the beginning of the program, you spoke about, then he talks about Amalek as an excuse to batter the people of Gaza. That's reprehensible, that's false, clearly patently false, because their use of the Torah is totally a crime, because like we said, the Torah told us, God told us to go into the land, then it was Amalek. Has nothing to do that we are in exile. No use, not one word of the Torah that they're using applies to them. The Zionism is a false branch of Judaism. It's a false representative in Judaism. It's on the contrary, it's a rebellion against God. And whenever they try to use the words of the Torah to apply to that, to explain away what they're doing, it's another crime, because they hijacked the name Israel, who's Jacob. They hijacked the start name, and they take words of the Torah misconstrue. I give an example. In the Torah it says, "Lo stirtzaf," don't kill. "Lo stignov," the Ten Commandments, don't steal. Well, and so you just blocked off the word "lo." Lo, it's in the tablets. It says "lo," so you say "sirtzaf," kill. Well, you could. In other words, if you want to twist the words of they're abusing and the words of the Torah, they're using it where they have no connection to the Torah whatsoever. We are in exile. We are forbidden to occupy even 1 inch of the Holy Land. We are forbidden. We have to be loyal citizens under the Palestinian people.
So, Rabbi, following on from that, according to your understanding, what exactly is the correct teaching of retribution according to the Torah? How much retribution is allowed or not allowed? Because we always hear this teaching of an eye for an eye. The previous rabbi, as I mentioned, Benjamin Lau, in episode 1, he basically was saying that it's justified. I don't want to misquote, but people can go back and watch the episode. But he was trying to argue that the actions are justified based on self-defense and other factors, which you can see in detail in episode 1. But my question is that how much is too much? And what is your stance on proportionate retribution or any kind of retribution? How much is allowed?
That's all false. It's all false. They weren't attacked. We have to remember. Now, we're not condoning the killing. It hurts. It hurts the 1,200 people, whatever, that were killed of the Jews. But we have to remember, this didn't just happen. They were attacked. This is not come out of a vacuum. This is because of 75 years of the state of Israel and well over 100 years of this movement of Zionism that came into a land where Jews and Arabs were living together in total peace. As in every Muslim land, we were living in the same courtyards. We were babysitting each other's children. We know old Arab people. We know our communities full of old Jews. We live in harmony. The difference of religion is nothing, has not an impediment to coexistence. It has nothing to do with this conflict. The Jews lived together with a distinctly different religion. As I said, we flourished under the Muslim countries. And in Palestine, what happened was a movement of these Zionists, these rebels against God, as I was showing you. They came along with their nationalist ideology, and they decided to create their state. And they came into a beautiful fabric of Jews living together with Muslims and Christians. And they come along and they want to impose their rule over the land, and that caused every action brings reaction. We're not condoning the killing, but that brought over 75 years of death, bloodshed, mostly of Palestinians, but also the Christian community, like the Palestinian, Muslim Palestinians, and Christians, who were the second largest group, and the Jews. The Zionists actually massacred the Jews also, but people don't talk about that. So the Zionists come along, and they created hate, mistrust, not only in Palestine, actually, in every Muslim land. Where are the beautiful big communities that was there? Because being that they conflated the religion, Judaism, together with their nationalist movements, so people started mistrusting the Jews, and they became the Nakbah, this terrible catastrophe that Jews all of a sudden are coming. So what the Zionists
So just to ask, because many people may not be aware, Rabbi, but what is the Nakbah? I've read into it somewhat, but many of the viewers may be completely unfamiliar. So just concisely, what is the Nakbah?
The Nakbah was the word given, it's an Arabic word, it means catastrophe. It is the word given to this movement of occupying the Holy Land, not Judaism. Judaism wasn't called Nakbah. We lived together, Jews and Muslims. As the Imam so eloquently said, that according to the Muslim religion, Jews ought to be respected and protected, and as we were. I mean, this is the history for before the human rights groups. Well, the only difference that changed is the introduction of 100-odd years ago of the concept of occupying and creating a so-called Jewish state. This creation, this occupation was called Nakbah, catastrophe, because that's exactly what it is. When this catastrophe started, the rabbis from the Jewish community, not even talking about the Muslim community, they pleaded. Here you have in 1947, the chief rabbi of the Jewish community. Remember that the Zionists used the Star of David. They used the name Israel, and they made a wrap in it, a window dressing to make it look kosher, to make it look halal, and they made a chief rabbi. But our community, the Jewish community, the God-fearing community that were living for hundreds of years together with the Muslims and the Christians that were living together in Palestine, we had a chief rabbi, and we still have a chief rabbi. But at that time, the chief rabbi in 1947 was Rabbi Dushinsky of blessed memory. And he pleaded with the United Nations. This is the United Nations documents. He said, we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. This was in 1947, a year before the United Nations ratified the state. He's speaking to the United Nations delegation. And so since then, and from before and since then, the Jewish community that were living there said, we don't want this Zionist movement. It's not religion. It's not Judaism. They have no right to be here. It is a Nakbah. They are making a Nakbah. Here you see hundreds of thousands of Jews demonstrating in the streets of Jerusalem. Here you see in front of the White House, tens of thousands demonstrating around the world. The very religious communities, which I'm part of Orthodox Jews. That's Jews who adhere strictly to the laws of the Torah. But above that,
Rabbi, just to ask you there,
yeah,
for the sake of the viewers, because some may not be aware, there's different type of denomination amongst the Jewish beliefs. So can you briefly explain the difference, because some people may not be aware?
A little before Zionism, that said we're going to reform, change to Judaism. At that time, was the Orthodox. That means that we're remaining true to the laws of the Torah. If we believe it's God's words, we are strictly adhering to the words of the Torah. They were called Orthodox, and so they were the adversary of Reform Judaism. And unfortunately, Reform became very popular. Today, unfortunately, majority of Jews do not keep the 10 Commandments. But the ones who are Orthodox stood fast against Reform. Now, unfortunately, when Zionism came, in order to make it legitimate, that the world, not that it should make it legitimate, that it should look legitimate, so they took rabbis from the Orthodox community, some rotten apples, that's what we say, cooked, and a few others who were learned. They used them, and they made a chief rabbi. They dressed him with nice clothing, and they traipsed around the world and say, yes, the Zionists have a right to do. So unfortunately, they confuse. There are communities that are what they call modern Orthodox. That's a euphemism of they making compromises in their religion. They don't dress modestly, properly, usually. They don't, everything is compromised. They're learning. And that's where the settlers, and you see now the ones who are in the government of Israel, the very extreme, that they say they're Orthodox, but they're from the modern, they are not from the very religious communities. Around the world, if you will go, if you're in London, if you will go to Stamford Hills in London, or you will come to New York, the largest community outside of Judaism, the religious community, is in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. There's not one Israeli flag. You will go to Mea She'arim, where the very religious community lives in Jerusalem and Al-Quds. They are all anti-Zionists. Like I say, there's hundreds of thousands of Jews around the world. They are from Orthodoxy. In other words, they don't change the words of the Torah, and they didn't fall prey to Zionism. I just want to show you, though. But since Zionism came about, they created the state, we're demonstrating. People get arrested. Boys and girls turn 17 because they refuse to serve in the mandatory military service in the IDF. So boys and girls until 17 become criminal. We stand and we demonstrate. We're never armed. And this is daily. Jews get beaten. Children. It's unbelievable. Old men. Our rabbis get assassinated. Yet we demonstrate for over 75 years. We're demonstrating in the streets of Jerusalem because we refuse. You see, this is an army. It's not just police. This is what's happening because we refuse to accept the legitimacy of the occupation, which is the Nakbah. So now when this guy, who you call this Rabbi Binyamin Lo, whoever he is, he's from the Zionism. It's just part of this facade, this masquerade of people who are using my religion, totally patently false. We have no right to occupy. The people of Gaza are being killed. Why? They say because they have no choice. Yes, they have a choice. Do what our rabbis pleaded and said from day one. Stop occupying. We can't occupy. They want to vilify the Muslim people, and they say to them, we can't make peace with you because you hate Jews, you're anti-Semitic. No, the Zionist state is anti-Semitic. They are the cause of bloodshed of so many Palestinian Muslims and Jews over 75 years. There was 1,200 people on October 7th that were murdered. So they want to say, it's Hamas. No, it's not Hamas. We're not saying people should be murdered. But where did it come from? Such a shock? Said this whole 1,200, maybe it will make people stop and think. 75 years, people played along with Zionism and let them occupy and make more settlements. And every time there was more bloodshed, and just 1,200 people being killed should bring a shock to the world and say, how much longer are we going to play along with your narrative that it's a religious conflict? Well, we know history attests till this Zionism came, we lived in peace. So how much are we going to let our common sense be insulted? The world's common sense is being insulted because you don't even have to look at the history books. You can ask old people and see that we live together. And Zionism kills with the narrative, it's because they're anti-Semites. No, it's not because they're anti-Semites. It's because you're stealing their homes. You're oppressing them. If the world would use tzedek, they would use righteousness and common sense, they would say that this murder of the 1,200 people is because of Zionism. They are the anti-Semites, and they're causing death and suffering.
Rabbi, you mentioned such an important point about the suffering of the people. And obviously, we condemn any human life that's lost, whether it's Israeli or Palestinian. It's all human life, and it's to be condemned. Any actions against Israelis, against innocent life is condemned, and any innocent life lost on the Palestinian side. However, the response from the Israelis now, there's so many analysts and so many other people who have clearly are saying that it's absolutely disproportionate, not just disproportionate, it is going beyond all reasonable limits, and innocent people, a whole population is being targeted, who are being cut off from water, electricity, and as of now, over 15,000 Palestinians have been killed. The vast majority of women and children and innocent have no recourse to fighting back or involved in the fighting. And a lot of people are calling this out. United Nations Secretary General, there are many other people who have said that this is absolutely unacceptable.
So we must stand up. It would be required to stand up the world and say immediately, stop and desist. This rabbi that you spoke to we wouldn't consider that a rabbi because he's rebelling against God by supporting this occupation. We would have to tell him, not just him, but we have to stop and desist. What you're doing is purely criminal. The victims are the Palestinian people living in Gaza and the refugee camps in Sabra Shaltila and Baja Barazda and all in the West Bank. These are the victims. And the ones who are anti-Semites, the ones who are causing death and making hate of Jewish people around the world, is the state of Israel. And they are the villains. So the world has to step back and stop falling prey to design. It's not only disproportionate, it's illegitimate. Their attack is simply because they're enforcing an oppression, an occupation. It's not just they have no right to be attacking Gaza. What they should be doing is saying, we give up. We put out our hands. 75 years they tried to think, and the culmination of their 75 years was 1,200 people being killed. That they said it's the greatest number. Okay, it's the greatest number. So maybe you stop and say enough of your foolish plan of standing on the heads and shoulders of three communities: the Muslim, the Christian, who certainly didn't want to be occupied, the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jewish community that pleaded with them and stand till today in the streets of Jerusalem and protest. Stop occupying. And that's the way we'll have a solution. It's not that would be the real solution. You go to a doctor and you have a hemorrhaging wound, so the doctor will prescribe cortisone to take away the pain and put a bandage around it. He's a criminal. You have to diagnose the sickness. So we're pleading with the world. Stop being misled by these Zionists. This is a group of counterfeiters. They're using the Jewish religion and to occupy people. It has nothing with this religion. We're living together with the different religions. It's a group of nationalists who came along with the flawed, selfish plan of creating a home in Interlopers that came to a land that was inhabited by three people, beautiful people living together, the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews, and they decided to take over. And it's not working. It's 75 years of death. So stop immediately. And not only people are silent, they're getting support, they're getting guns, they're getting bullets, they're getting arms from the Western world. We plead with the Western world, the leaders. You can't do this. It's not disproportionate.
So, Rabbi, as you mentioned, but as of now, right now, there's a so-called temporary ceasefire, and we don't know what will happen now in the future if it will resume. But the suffering is indescribable. You feel like even crying for them is not enough. And we've been speaking to people on the ground in Gaza, and it's just heart-wrenching hearing the accounts of how they're living as if every moment they're ready for death, some people were telling us on the ground. And often the aid is so limited that it's basically equal to zero for a lot of people. And I was actually listening to some news channels who I wasn't expecting to push back, and even they were pushing back against the spokespeople from the Israeli government. For example, they're talking about tunnels that were built, but then we found out that some of these tunnels were actually built by the Israelis in the first place, but it wasn't mentioned. And of course we have the hostages, and this is, we don't feel that it's right to keep any hostages, and all these families should be released, of course. At the same time, we weren't aware until recently, it wasn't prominently made aware, that there were many Palestinians, women and from a young age, children, who are kept in captivity by the Israeli government on the other side, and they were also being released. So a lot of this is about how the media only often present one side. At the end of the day, it's human life, which is suffering. And even we saw there was a clip of the families of the hostages confronting in a meeting members of the Israeli government, saying it's time to stop talking about killing Arabs, rather than it's time to talk about saving lives of our people. And so even some of these people are pushing back against them, and they don't feel it's right to just go on this extreme approach which they are adopting. Imam Zafir, the rabbi, is very eloquently mentioned that Muslims accepted Jewish communities with open arms, and this was in recent times. But can you mention some examples of how Muslims and Jews lived together from even the historic times? Because essentially we have to go back to the roots. How did Islam essentially teach about Muslims and Jews living together? And what examples can we find in Islamic history, Imam Zafir?
I already have spoken about the Charter of Medina, where the Holy Prophet himself in his lifetime formed a treaty with the Jews that were living in Medina. But if we look at, in particular, the second Caliph of Islam, Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he actually went to Jerusalem, at the time it was occupied by the Byzantines, and when the Muslim army defeated the Byzantines, they wouldn't hand over Jerusalem. The historians put it in a way that when he went into Jerusalem and he settled the treaty, the matters in terms of who would stay, the bishop was surprised because all the caliph said was that the Roman politicians, they have to leave, but everyone else will stay. The churches will stay as they are. They will be protected. They will be given protection. At the time, there were no Jews in Jerusalem at the time because due to earlier regimes, they had formed a treaty with the Sassanians. And when the Byzantines came over, and that was against the Byzantines, so when the Byzantines came over, they dealt quite harshly with the Jews and in fact exiled them or had them killed. But soon after this treaty was formed, when Jerusalem fell to the Muslim rule, the Jews were soon allowed again back into Jerusalem. And they lived again with the Christian communities, with the Muslim communities. That's in the time of the caliphs. But even if we go look at how Spain was, if you think about it, a lot of the narrative these days again is that the Muslims in Spain, they were hard on the citizens. They imposed unlawful taxes, etc.
So you're referring to Al-Andalus, right? And for the benefit of the viewers, what sort of time frame or time period are you referring to?
So Al-Andalus was captured in 711, and the Muslims ruled up until approximately 1492. But if you look at the early times, there were Christians, Jews, and Muslims in the same cabinet, in the government, in higher authorities. Some were judges, some were politicians, and in fact, that was a thriving community. And that's when even Maimonides, a very famous philosopher, he also spoke about how art, culture, and all of this was abundant in Muslim-occupied Spain. So yes, look, if we look at history, we will find there will be times, there will be kings, certain kings who had their own agenda, who dealt harshly with their citizens. But that is not a reflection of what the Islamic teachings were. If you want to look at the reflection or the true embodiment of what the Islamic teachings were, of what the Qur'an teaches, then we have to look at what the Prophet taught in his lifetime and the four rightly guided caliphs that we accept. And their example is, as I mentioned, when Umar bin al-Khattab, he actually cleaned up the temple. He actually went and, because at the time the Christians would throw rubbish where the site of the temple was to annoy the Jews.
So part of the reason for this show is to bring together religious beliefs and give people knowledge about religion, which often seems not accessible. We want to make religious beliefs and history more accessible for the lay viewer. And so when you talk about the temple or the ruins of the temple of Soloman, it was the Qibla or the direction which they used to pray for the Jews, but also for the Muslims, right?
When the Holy Prophet initially prayed towards Jerusalem, and this is something which might be, intriguing for the viewers, that even 13 years of his prophetic mission, he prayed towards Jerusalem. Even after the migration to Medina, for a further 16 months, he prayed towards Jerusalem. And all the Muslims at the time would pray towards Jerusalem. And that's after that 16-month period, the Qibla was changed, or the direction of prayer was changed to Mecca. So again, this land is holy and sacred for all the Abrahamic faiths.
Rabbi, I think here it's very pertinent I ask you the same question, because not everyone is familiar from a religious point of view. What is the Temple Mount? Or what is the temple we are referring to, and why is it so revered to the Jewish people?
Yes, so with the help of the Almighty, when the Almighty took the Jewish people out of Egypt, we made the covenant with God, so keep the Torah. God required of us to go to the Holy Land, and we were to build a temple. And King Solomon built the temple. Then what happened was the temple was destroyed as God wanted it, and we were sent into exile. But when we were sent into exile, we were warned that we are not, by the way, it's very ironic, that we are not to go up onto that area of the Temple Mount where the temple stood, that King Solomon built. It was all destroyed by the Romans, by the Greeks, and there remained only the outer wall called the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, because people prayed there, they called the Wailing Wall. Inside of the Wailing Wall, that's in the Temple Mount, where the Al-Aqsa compound is, Jews are expressly forbidden Jews are expressly forbidden to go into that area. Prior to to Islam, we are forbidden to go into that area. It's because considered by us that a person gets cut off from God if he goes into that area, because we need a special purification to go into that area. So for now, it's 2,000 years that Jews, we do not go into the area of the Temple Mount. We stand outside by the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, and we pray. And to Jews, for our history, the control over that area of the Temple Mount is given to the Muslim people under the Waqf, it's called. And they always gave the permission for the Jews to pray there. For the last hundreds of years, Jews went and prayed. As on before the Bima said so eloquently, it was the Muslims who gave the Jews the permission to go back to Jerusalem. And we lived there, and we went to the Wailing Wall to pray without any problems. This is what we did for hundreds of years. But we never went into the Temple Mount because that's forbidden. It's haram for us. We get cut off from God. So now, if you remember, the Zionists come along. Sharon, when he was the prime minister, one of the other heads of this gangster state of Israel, they said the head of it was once Sharon, once it was Rabin, now it's Netanyahu. He decided his political aspirations. He took 1,000 soldiers and went up onto the Temple Mount. Even though, as religious Jews, we know we are forbidden to step up on that area. Like I say, haram, we get cut off from God. Just another entry saying about the Temple Mount. So we had permission to pray there, and even today, it's the Zionists who are the ones who are constantly threatening about going up on the Temple Mount, but not and they call themselves religious Zionists, like I was explaining. These religious Zionists are using Orthodox Jewry, and they conflated it with as they use the Torah. Netanyahu used Amalek, used all these terms and the Torah to legitimize their takeover. But it's not Orthodox Jewry if you're rebelling against God and trying to be and not accepting exile, and you're trying to leave exile. So the Zionist state uses Orthodox Jewry, the settlers. You always see them in the pictures because they're in the settlements, but they're not. And so you think that many religious Jews share that view. No, the very religious communities around the world, wherever you go invariably, they stand in opposition. The settlers are part of this modern, we call this Rati, modern religious that are Zionists that take the Orthodox Jewry and try to use the Torah to legitimize that verse of the Torah that they could take the Temple Mount. That's one of the worst sins, going up and trying to take the Temple Mount. And in fact, in the 1920s, the chief rabbi of Palestine was rabbi of the Jewish community. Again, nothing with the rabbinate of Israel. Was Rabbi Zafir. He was prior to the rabbinate I mentioned earlier, and he met with the king of Transjordan in the 1920s and declared that we are loyal to the leadership of the Muslim people, to the king of Transjordan was in control at that time, and he and not only that, but he put out a statement that I have in his statement. He sent it to the Arab newspapers. Bear with me a second. He in Arabic. Okay, I'll have it on the picture of the backs of some of my books here. We have a book, Traditional Torah, Opposition to Zionism. But he put out in Arabic, they put out statements to the Arab people declaring that we have no want and no will to take the Temple Mount or anything that has to do that's being held holy by the Muslim people. This was the Jewish view. We never wanted to, again, take the land or that was considered holy, the whole land, and certainly not the Temple Mount and so forth. This was already in the 1920s, before the Zionists came along and that created this state. Here it is. I was looking for this. We put out a pamphlet. Simply, this was in the 1920s. You have the writings of the chief rabbi of Palestine, Rabbi Yosef Zunfeld, of blessed memory, the anti-Zionist chief rabbi of the Orthodox Jewish community of Palestine. He passed away in 1932, and he declared, he issued a statement in Arabic in a local leading Arabic newspaper called Al-Salam, and he said, the Jews do not want in any way to take with that which isn't theirs. They certainly don't want to contest the right of other inhabitants to the places held by them which they regard with honor and consider holy. And in particular, there is no foundation to the rumor that the Jews want to acquire the Temple Mount. On the contrary, from the time that Because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. Our holy temple was destroyed, and we have been lacking the purity required by the Torah. It is forbidden for any Jewish person to set foot upon the grounds of the Temple Mount until the coming of the righteous Messiah, with the Spirit of the Almighty, which will rule righteously for the good of all creation and will return to the purity required by the Torah. So he's talking about the Temple Mount. So just basically, all the Zionist use of the Torah is criminal. It's malicious. It's not true. And when you have the settlers or the rabbis who back them, you had a Rabbi Wolf who says, we have no choice, we have no choice. Please respect Jews who are the authorities. We never strayed from the Torah. The very religious communities who are living in the literally hundreds of thousands of Jews and the thousands and thousands of great Torah authorities, respected, distinguished rabbis. We never strayed from the Torah. We said, I think, this Zionism is simply a aberration. It's a movement that's using the Torah. But if you would take that away, we can have peace. If you would, just like the apartheid was stopped, everybody thought it would never be able to be ended because the blacks will come and wipe out the white people. They'll kill them all. But there was pressure from the grassroots. The people put pressure on the politicians. The politicians wasn't happy with this. You had in the United Nations, South Africa had a seat, and they were considered a distinguished country. And it was only Mandela and there was others were considered terrorists, but they stood up and said, no, this is unacceptable. And they made so uncomfortable the political leaders till it was stopped. And today nobody will consent to apartheid. It is so criminal. What do you mean? You take black people because of the color of the skin and the second class? It doesn't make sense. And South Africa was considered a God-fearing country. The same thing is with Israel. People, they say they're a God-fearing country, but they're perpetrating with its mere existence every day a Nakbah, a colossal catastrophe, oppressing people and the people in Gaza you see, the whole world sees the catastrophe, what it is. So it's not an answer because we have no choice. There is a choice. Let the world take the matter into its hands and desist the occupation. And immediately, of course, the food, medicine, and the people of Gaza freedom, but all the Palestinian people and all of Palestine should be set free. Our rabbis, as I said, stood together with the Palestinian people when they created the Palestinian Authority. Back then, we had our one of our rabbis became the representative of the Jews of the PLO. His name was Rabbi Moshe Hirsch, of blessed memory, and the Zionists poured acid in his face and blinded him in one eye. He was barely able to see from the other. In Lebanon, when there was the attacks on Safir 2, it was President Arafat who protected the Jewish synagogues, and nobody talks about that. And I've met with the leadership in Gaza, Ismail Haniyeh, the Prime Minister from Hamas, and he's standing with us. He said, we're not against Jews. We are against the occupation of President Abbas because we're not political. Although we don't share the view of two-state, we say it should be all free, but totally free Palestine. But they all say one thing: we're not against the Jewish people. And if you go to Shiite, Sunni, we went to Iran. We went to the Grand Mufti of Al-Azhar took us in. We spoke over there. Or we went to Lebanon. The Hezbollah, there was a gathering of all the Shiite world, and everybody said one thing: we are not against Jews. We embrace. We are totally willing and want to live together, but just not occupying. It's a terrible, terrible, tragic mistake that the world is supporting Zionism, and they're saying the ones who are opposing them as anti-Semitic. Like I said, anti-Semitic is the occupation. They are causing bloodshed. And they are causing hate of Jews also, and mistrust. So the world will recognize this, because in the Torah it says, why are you rebelling against me? It will not be successful. This state will end. We are certain it will end. We only urge everybody, and we pray to God, and we urge everybody to pray to His Almighty to bring a speedy and peaceful removal of the impediment to peace, removal of this occupation in its entirety.
So, Rabbi, it's been very enlightening to learn this from you, and you've clarified many of the traditions of the Judaic faith, and it ties in with our core values to dispel myths or attacks against religion, because we have learned a lot. There's a lot of misrepresentation of the Jewish teachings. And the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmed, he actually said in a Friday sermon, I remember, he said that these people who are doing these attacks against Gaza, they're not even following their own teachings, which doesn't permit this. And often people weren't sure. They said, but actually it does say in their teachings, because there are some harsh teachings in the Torah. But you've clarified this very eloquently, and you've explained what this actually means. And I think this is really crucial and important to know. And I wanted to ask the same question. In the interest of fairness, Imam Zafir, there's many people who are alleging that there's harsh teachings in the Qur'an or in the Islamic traditions against non-believers or Jewish people or non-believers in general. So Imam Zafir, how do you respond to this very common allegation being raised right now across the media?
Those who cherry pick all these verses, they have a specific context to them. They ignore all of those verses in which God Almighty says, look after the orphans, look after the widows, look after your neighbors, help them, protect them. They ignore all of those teachings and they want to go straight to a verse which says, read without context, which might be perceived as very, very harsh. Let me give you one example. It's easier because people will go back and they can refer to this, is that in chapter 2, verse 129, God Almighty says, if you just look at this verse alone, without any context, it says, and kill them wherever you meet them, and drive them out from where they have driven you, for persecution is worse than killing. And fight them not in the sacred mosque until they fight you therein. But if they fight you, then fight them. Such is the requital for the disbelievers. Now, if you just look at this verse, read it without any context and just pick that up, that will seem very harsh. But then you ignore the verse just before this, 191, where God says, and fight in the cause of Allah against those who fight against you. But and then again, at the end of this verse, God says, but do not transgress. If you don't understand the entire context, you can completely misrepresent. And the interesting thing is not just anti-Islam or anti-Muslim propagandists that do this. It's actually some Muslims who have a very radical or extremely right-wing approach who use these very verses to promote their own sort of ideology. But then the Holy Qur'an is not just a book which has words. It was actually acted on in the life of the Prophet. And if you think about it, there were many times, many instances where the Prophet could have taken arms, or he could have exacted retribution, but he chose to adopt the aspect of mercy. One example, in the time when the Prophet went back into Mecca, and he went with an army of 10,000 people, he went to the people who had persecuted him, killed his followers. For 13 long years, they suffered. So at that time, they were at his mercy, and they were intrigued to see what would the Prophet do to them. So the Prophet said, today, there will be no punishment for any of you. And that was the same verse, which is La tathriba alaykum al-yawm, is the same wording that Prophet Joseph said to his brothers. When his brothers came in the end, Prophet Joseph also said the same thing. So the Prophet used those words, those prophetic words of Prophet Joseph, for the people of Mecca, saying that today there'll be no punishment. And look what happened after that. Most of the population of Mecca accepted Islam. So if the Prophet now exacted retribution and said, okay, all of those people who persecuted my followers will be put to death, what would have happened? There would have been bloodshed. But that's not what the Prophet came to teach, and that's not what the Quran teaches either. So through this example, and again, like what the Rabbi said, there are people who will take out certain verses of the Torah, of the Quran, and they will use it for their own agendas, whereas actually that's not the correct teachings.
So thank you, Imam Zafir. And Rabbi, coming back to you, I have two final questions. First of all, thank you. You've given us so much of your time, well beyond the time that we had allocated or you had allocated, and I really appreciate that you gave so much of your time. I'm sure you have many other interviews and things to do. I want to learn from you, and we want to learn from you in general, not just in this context, not just in the context of the Palestine-Israel war, but in general, in any situation. How would you explain this teaching of an eye for an eye? Because this is one of the contentions there about revenge, retribution. So how do you explain the teaching of an eye for an eye?
Judaism is very clear. An eye for an eye is absolutely not to knock out an eye for an eye. It's absolutely not that. The Torah, as we know, the Torah was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. to give to the Jewish people. It's 630 commandments. It's very concise. So it's very clear. There's no even one of the commentaries, people or rabbis who would translate an eye for an eye to mean an eye. It's very clear in our teaching. It means the cost. If somebody's eye was knocked out, they have to go and see the value of what that was diminished to the person, whatever the cost of the losing his eye, and that's what has to be paid back to that person. With the help of the Almighty, as I was saying, we have certain pockets of the world. We have in London, in Antwerp, Belgium. You have in Jerusalem, and many other places in Bnei Brak. You have pockets of you have Jewish places where Beit Shemesh, you have, and around the world, you have in Canada, you have in Argentina, with Argentina small, there's a very religious communities. So we keep ourselves insulated. We do, because we consider all these other movements, Reform Judaism, Zionism, all these ones that are changing to be unacceptable. So we're insulated. We have our own schools. We have our own places, the cemeteries. The Orthodox are buried. We have everything. We grow up, and we have even our own, a lot of the old stores and everything, and our communities are insulated. In that manner, we keep our religion flourishing, and we're very careful that our youth should grow up properly. And we affect other people, because especially today with alternative media, a lot of people who go to universities and just people listen and hear, and the ones who are seeking truth end up coming back to us. While the other communities, they're going on their merry way. Unfortunately, it's not merry, it's a sad way, it's a bitter way, but they're following the ways of disobeying the laws of the Torah, not keeping the Sabbath, Reform Judaism, and a lot of them are, Zionists. They're supporting because they're following emotions that how could you see Jews suffered so much, the Holocaust, and so you have to support the state of Israel. My grandparents were killed in Auschwitz. My father escaped the Nazis. He escaped when the Nazis came to Hungary. He escaped. My father was in Auschwitz. My mother's mostly a blessed memory, and my father, blessed memory. Their families were almost entirely murdered, as the rest of our communities. So we know what the Holocaust is. We suffered the Holocaust, but we're not going to use the Holocaust that they suffered because we were Jews. We're not going to use that to punish another people and to rebel against God. We're not going to take the blood of our grandparents, of our families, that they died because they're Jewish, and use that to rebel against God, steal the land from the Palestinians and so forth. So although now the people come from other communities and they come with emotions, we have to have a state. It's because they're lacking the knowledge. And so we live in our communities, and that is why we're able to, with God's help, we flourish, and we don't have that much. But what we do, and I can say other people follow, some people come back to us because they hear from, and our rabbis put up many books. The chief rabbis of Palestine, they put up hundreds of books were published, and they try to teach the world. That said, we don't debate and we don't go out to the Reformed Jews or Zionists, because we're not going to debate, is there a God? They want, they can hear. We put out publications, we teach, and whoever wants to look for the truth, they can find it. But so we won't go out and mingle and live with these communities. They're angry at us. It's true. If I would go to them, they get very upset. And a lot of these people are actually, in a certain manner, they're very innocent, because they were not indoctrinated with their teaching, and they were told that the Arabs and the Muslims and the Palestinians are like the Nazis. It's disgusting to repeat even, but they indoctrinate them with that to make them fear. They use fear monitoring. That the people that they say, and they use emotions. We suffered 2,000 years in exile, and now we are the beginning of redemption. God is giving us back the land. How dare you stand up in opposition to this? So we try to explain, if they come and ask properly, with respect, we try to explain to them that they're being conned, they're being duped, and they're falling into the trap of the Satan. We are in exile. We are commanded by God stringently. Do not get impatient. Do not try to leave exile. And they're simply being duped by a group of nationalists who are using the facade, who are masquerading in the religion. So we try to get them educated. And we know, we get attacked viciously. And actually, there would be hundreds of thousands of more Jews demonstrating in the streets if it wouldn't have been for the bitter attacks of, as I was showing you the pictures of Jews who go out to demonstrate, and they hear how rabbis are murdered or assassinated. They hear how Jews are arrested because you just now it went viral 2 weeks ago or something that Jews demonstrated against Netanyahu, religious Jews against the occupation, and they were beaten up. So people see this and they're afraid to stand up. There's many Jews around the world who would be more outspoken if it wouldn't be for that fear of these attacks. Our rabbis, as I mentioned, the chief rabbi of Palestine, Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum, with blessed memory, moved to New York. It was the 50s, and 1950, and he was there for many years. And he gave his edicts as chief rabbi of Palestine from New York, and he urged his followers to leave. That we shouldn't be supporting that state. They should, if they could possibly leave, they should leave. And hundreds of thousands of Jews who are anti-Zionists, who are his followers, live in the United States, in Canada, in London. It's called Satmar schools. These are anti-Zionists created by the chief rabbi of Palestine. So basically, we urged people, he said, stand up at the cost of your lives, go out into the streets, let people know it's not Judaism, that we cry, we hurt with the suffering of the occupied in Palestine, and we want the world to know it's not our religion, and we are totally opposed to it. So our people go out, many people go out, but there will be hundreds of thousands more go out. And we try to avoid, we don't go to the communities to live, but we try to avoid that. At the same time, we try to teach that, and we try to get the youth and try to teach the people of the other Jewish communities that they should start accepting the Torah, keep the Sabbath, stop being Zionists, and we try. And that's what our life is trying to do.
So, Rabbi, it's very interesting to hear that reaction. And speaking of reactions, Imam Zafir, I was reading in the Guardian newspaper recently, there was an article saying that young Americans are inspired by the Palestinians' resilience to start reading the Holy Qur'an. So young Americans are being inspired towards the Qur'an because of the steadfastness and incredible resolve shown by Palestinians, which we are seeing across the media. I saw some TikToks as well, where a lot of Gen Zs and Gen X generation people, there was one clip of a young girl and she's literally crying in tears, saying that it's so incredible seeing the resolve of these Palestinians, and now she's drawn to the Qur'an, someone who had no knowledge or interest, so to speak, before. So, when people find out they're so firm on their faith despite this atrocity, so my question is, why are they drawn to, what is it in the Qur'an or Islam that could have drawn them subsequently, Imam Zafir?
The first thing I would say is that, if no one's picked up a Qur'an, it's very easy. You can find it everywhere. You can find it even online. So the very word itself, Qur'an, means recitation. So it was always destined for it to be recited and read, not just to be simply put on the shelf. And in fact, it's very interesting what you just mentioned, that someone said they found peace in it, because one verse in the Quran is that surely in the remembrance of Allah do the hearts find comfort. And actually that's a teaching which can resonate with a lot of people, that in this day and age where there's conflict all around the world, people are suffering, there's people are going through different difficulties in their lives. The one thing that Islam teaches us is to come back to God, to drown your sorrows in the remembrance of God, and actually to pick up the Quran and start acting on those commandments. And through that you can actually achieve inner peace. And once you achieve inner peace, then you can work outwards towards your neighbors, towards people around you. So that's the thing about reciting the Quran and stuff. If people are coming back to it, then that's really interesting. And that is how God Almighty has also said that the Quran should be recited, read. It's available in many, many languages. It can be picked up by anyone.
So Imam Zafir and Rabbi, for me, it's very interesting. Often man-made laws are made. These laws are constantly changing. They're often not necessarily made by a huge part of the population, but a minority of the population is making these laws, which are constantly evolving because they don't always fit into the solutions that are needed at the time. Society is breaking down in so many ways, and a lot of the rules and regulations cannot match with the problems that we are facing today. Extreme liberalism has been tried. And often now people are looking back to having some kind of code of conduct, having some kind of rules and regulations, having some kind of anchor which they've lost. Even in this country, they had Christianity, and now a survey showed that over 50% for the first time in this generation or many generations are not following Christianity. So losing their anchor, going to extreme liberalism has not worked, and now people are looking to come back into some semblance of order. And this reminds me that in the Review of Religions, for example, if you look at the Qur'an and what it tells, we did an article we're about to publish. It's about alcohol. The Qur'an, of course, forbids alcohol. I remember when I was growing up, this question was often asked, why can't you just drink one sip of alcohol? What's the harm? In fact, there were studies that showed that drinking a little bit of wine or alcohol a week or so on can actually be beneficial. This was difficult to answer because this was scientific studies. However, now recently, one of the biggest or huge, massive research was conducted by CDC on behalf of the Canadian government. And they did a massive survey of a huge number of people. And the conclusion of the secular survey, which had no link with Islam or the Quran, was that the previous researches that were done were actually defunct and not done properly in different ways, or were not accurate. And actually their research, their conclusion was that the best way to deal with alcohol and to avoid its effects is to drink no alcohol, not a single sip. This is their conclusion, a secular organization and one of the biggest ever researchers on alcohol. So this is also really interesting. The solutions that the Quran has mentioned is just one of many solutions, which often, as I said, things change from the secular world over time. Rabbi, now at the end, I'd like to ask you that two things. Number one, where do we go from here? Now we have this situation. There are a number of Jewish people, a number of Arabs and Muslims and other Arabs there's also Christian Arabs and other Arabs as well. But we have Arabs and we have Jewish people. We have a state. We are here now. So how do we establish peace? Is the solution a two-state solution? Where do we go from here?
Without any ambiguity, without any, the problem is one thing. It's not a conflict of religions. It's not Jews against Muslims. It's not Judaism against Islam. It's an occupation of a ersatz Judaism, a new type of Judaism that's called Zionism. It's Zionism, the state of Israel, that's occupying, that's the villains, occupying the victims, the Palestinian people. It's an unacceptable thing. It has nothing with religion. It's the opposite of what religion is. It's unacceptable. That's first of all. Now, as I said, a doctor, once you know, you recognize, you diagnose the sickness, you can start searching a solution. Now, what we say is history shows us very clearly as that Jews were not only living in peace with the Muslims, but they were embraced and given a safe haven by the Muslim countries. So we were living as in Palestine, as I mentioned, the Caliph, the Sultan, they took us, and the Jews when the Christians threw us out. We flourished, including in Palestine. There is a way to approach this project, this problem. South Africa, as I mentioned, people said it would be impossible to solve because you had so many years of oppression of the black people. If you were free of South Africa, they'll murder us. And you see, it was a mirage, it was just fear-mongering of in South Africa. Once they stopped the apartheid, they came to a solution how they could do it. Here, if the people, the leaders of the world, will stop supporting the occupation, and on the contrary, will insist that we have a free land, that we will be to follow the history of hundreds of years and live together in peace. Now, there are people who committed atrocities, who committed terrible, terrible crimes. So America and Britain and all these lands give billions of dollars every year for arms, for weapons. If they'll take these billions of dollars of 1 year or 2 years or 3 years and relocate the people who are the prison staff in the Israeli camps, prison camps, the ones who committed atrocities, the people will feel uncomfortable. Let them be relocated to America, to Canada. It's quite large. There's places to go. And the rest of the people will be able to coexist in peace and harmony. We're certain of that. And it should be under a free Palestine, however the Palestinian people will want their country to be. That is the solution that we believe. But even, God forbid, if you will disagree with me, come to another solution. But don't misconstrue what the problem is, and therefore continue to support the oppression of the Palestinians. That is unacceptable to the last 10th degree. That can't be. We have to stand and know the problem is occupation. We have to immediately address the problem and stop murdering the people of Gaza. Give them everything they need, freedom, medicine, everything, and freedom, and the people, same for the people of Palestine. We can't address it. There can be a solution with God's help, inshallah.
Rabbi, we will finish off, but I feel it's pertinent to mention here, as you mentioned the United Nations, I want to bring in someone who I feel played a phenomenal role in the upholding the rights of the Palestinians within the United Nations, and he delivered perhaps the greatest ever speech in the United Nations General Assembly in support of the Palestinian cause. He was a member of the community that we belong to, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. At the time, he was the first foreign minister of Pakistan. He was also at some time the president of the United Nations General Assembly and also the judge of the International Court of Justice of The Hague. His name was Sir Zafarullah Khan. And as first foreign minister of Pakistan in 1947, when they were discussing the creation of State of Israel, he said some phenomenal things. I'll just mention some brief points since you mentioned the United Nations. Number one, he questioned the authority of how the United Nations was deciding that this huge population would move into Palestine. On what basis were they deciding this? The Palestinians themselves had not agreed to it. The Arab states had not agreed to it. So how was the United Nations just making this decision? On what authority and on what basis? Number two, he said, okay, fair enough, for argument's sake, we say that we're going to create these two states. Nobody is talking about the unfairness of the division of the two states. Number one, on one side you have a tiny Jewish population of 10 or so thousand amongst a population of 500,000 or even more than 500,000. They are called a minority. On the other side, you have a population of nearly 500,000 Arabs living near to 500,000 or so Jewish people, and those 500,000 Arabs who are just about almost equal in population are called a minority. Secondly or thirdly, the actual land that was given. If you look at the actual land that could be cultivated for agriculture, the huge majority of that land which could be cultivated for something of harvest or successful was given to the Jewish side. Things like citrus even, which was a common thing that was grown there, much of that, the main part, was given to the Jewish side. Similarly, a lot of the desert area, barren desert area, was given to the Arab side. The access to the Red Sea, which was very extremely important in terms of strategy and resources, was given to the Jewish side, and so on and so on. He explained that how is this a fair division when the vast majority, or a huge amount of the resources, a huge amount of the area which could be used for benefit, for yield, was given to one side. And then this whole thing was, he said Australia refused to take the Jewish people, America refused to take them, and so did others. So his speech is incredible. You can go read it on the United Nations website, and we republished it in the Review of Religions, called An Appeal to the World for the Palestinians by Sir Zafarullah Khan. And it's so important to mention, since you mentioned the United Nations as well.
And they want you to say Jews or Jewish state because that, right, it has the connotation of being anti-Semitic, and you become disqualified. It rules that power, what you're going to say. Be careful. And it isn't Jewish state, and it isn't the Jews. There's many Jews around the world who are openly and vocally opposing the state, and any more crying and hurting in their hearts, but they're afraid to be outspoken. So be careful. Call it what it is, the Zionist state. In Iran, they're very careful. They call it the Zionist state of Israel. It happens to be the least. That's why I think Iran is so hated by the state of Israel. Secondly, we want the people of Gaza, we urge people, please send our messages, our words, our demonstrations, our feelings, that the Jewish people around the world, the people of Gaza, it should know that we're hurting and crying with them. They should know that they have the hearts and souls of the Jewish people around the world true to Judaism. We're feeling with them, and we pray for them constantly. It's in our prayers that God should protect and save them. And we want also the world to know, don't be silent. You're accused of being anti-Semitic because that's the Zionist ploy. But look at the very religious communities around the world, including in Al-Quds in Jerusalem, in the United States, wherever, you will see And it's very clear the difference between Judaism and Zionism. You're not anti-Semitic by being outspoken. You're on the contrary, by being silent is supporting supporting anti-Semitism. To speak up, do what you can for the people of Gaza, for Palestine. And again, we should all pray to God, who's Almighty, to bring the speedy and peaceful end of this occupation, this end of the Zionist state of Israel. There should be a free Palestine, so we as Jews can embrace the people of the Muslim, the Arab people, the people of Palestine, and say, here's back your land and your lives.
That reminds me of an article we published titled A Plea to the World from Gaza. And the author, who's obviously from Gaza, he spoke about how he sees death in everyone's faces. He says there's no life. He said it's literally like Judgment Day. And what he requested is what he said, that he asked that people should send or convey the message of the people of Gaza to the world, because the world isn't listening. The world is not listening to our appeals. We are literally a moments away from death. He said there's not a square mile in Gaza which is safe. He himself had to move 5 times in 30 days. He said all the bakeries are bombed. And he said there's no future, there's no life. And this is why our message has to be conveyed to people with influence. So it's very important that you are also, Rabbi, helping to convey this message. And I commend you for this. But finally, Rabbi and Imam Zafir, I would like to ask, is there a prayer from the Torah or the Qur'an that we can end on? And Rabbi, I begin with you. If there's any prayer we can end from the Torah that can help give some alleviation in the current times. Rabbi.
With the help of the Almighty, in our high holiday prayers, it says, we pray that God should give it to the hearts and minds of the leaders, the kings and leaders of the world, that they should strive for peace and not warfare. We certainly put out prayers that the leaders of the world should immediately step up to the plate and end this terrible slaughter around the world, all the rest of that. I will pray, but I'm directing it to the leaders of the world, not to the state of Israel, because this is, we believe, a criminal entity. It's not a legitimate rulership. So to them, we want the world to stop their occupation. We're not addressing that because we feel that it's a land of, it's a criminal occupation. We're addressing the proper leaders in the world that have the power and can, and with God's help, sooner now they see this come about.
Imam Zafir, I'll end with you as well. Same question. What prayer would you like to end on from the Islamic traditions, Imam Zafir?
So there are a lot of prayers mentioned in the Quran. I think for this particular moment, I think it will be an interesting prayer from Prophet Moses himself, where he says, قَالَ رَبِّي نَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ, that, O Lord, deliver me from the wrongdoing people, that the people who are causing oppression, save me from that. So perhaps this will be a prayer that can be used these days.
So we've come to the end of our podcast. I especially thank Rabbi Weiss. As I said, you've gone way over the allocated time, and I'm so thankful to you. I learned so much. Imam Zafir, I'm sure you're the same, and the viewers as well, I'm sure are the same. That I'm sure you've learned so much from today. It was very enlightening. And do leave some comments. Do let us know if you want to, what kind of guests you want us to interview for future Let's Review. Until next time, peace be upon you.